little close. I don't want to shout at you. Is that better? Okay. Someone brought the plate back this morning. So someone's going to get this plate. It's Norwegian waffles from the Bachlands. It looks really neat. Somebody did a lot of work on this. It looks yummy. Who has not had the sharing plate yet? Ah, Angela. All right. And what you'll do is you'll enjoy these, and then either next week or the following week, you'll bring it back with something yummy on it, and we'll share it with somebody else. No, you'll do good. All right. Well, this is the last Sabbath of our Psalms that we've been doing for this quarter. Have you enjoyed it? Yeah, there's always something good in God's Word, isn't there? Let's have prayer before we get started. Father in heaven, thank you so much that you love us all the time with no holds barred, and you care no matter what we're going through. Please be with us on our waiting time. I pray this in your name. Amen. Okay, this lesson is called Wait on the Lord, and I'm calling it in my own mind, In God's Waiting Room. Have you all spent time in God's waiting room? Everybody does. Okay. Right now. Okay. Well, this morning I'm going to start with a little story that I just love. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but if you have, it's fun and it bears repeating. Dwight Nelson told this story a while back in one of his sermons. There was a pastor who had a very tender heart. When he went out into his yard one day, he heard a mewing sound and looked up into the tree. There sat a tiny kitten on the limb. He tried everything to get the cat down, but the cat was afraid to come down the tree. The pastor coaxed. He offered warm milk and everything he could think of, but the cat would not come down. The tree wasn't sturdy enough to climb, so the pastor, feeling bad for the kitten, decided that if he tied a rope to his car and drove forward a bit, that the tree would bend down and he would be able to reach the cat. That's what he did, all the while checking the cat's progress in his mirror. He then figured if he went just a bit further, the tree would be bent sufficiently for him to reach the kitten. But as he moved the car just a little further forward, the rope broke. The tree went boing, and the kitten instantly sailed through the air and out of sight. No one had seen one. So he prayed, Lord, I just commit this cat to your keeping, and went on about his business. A few days later, he was in the grocery store, and he met one of his church members. He happened to look into the shopping cart and was amazed to see cat food. Everyone knew that this woman hated cats. So he said, why are you buying cat food when you hate cats so much? She replied, you won't believe it. Then she told him how her little girl had been begging her for a cat, but she kept refusing. Then a few days before, the child had begged again, so the mom finally said to the little girl, well, if God gives you a cat, you can keep it. She told the pastor, I watched my child go out into the yard, get on her knees and ask God for a cat. And really, Pastor, you won't believe this, but I saw it with my own eyes. A kitten suddenly came flying out of the blue sky, and with its paws outspread, it landed right in front of her. What could I do? Don't you love it when God answers our prayers quickly like that? If only all of them were answered that quickly, but we would miss out on some things if God answered our prayers immediately sometimes. Have you ever had answers to prayer? Everybody does, right? Little ones, big ones, in-between ones. We all go to God because we know that He's the person that can help us. No one else can help us like He can. But as you know, there are times when we all are in God's waiting room. Times when He says, well, not yet, or maybe even no. And it's hard. It's hard when we don't know what God is thinking, and we wish we could just, have a little talk with him and find out what's going on. Are there times in your everyday life when you're just waiting on something? You're at the doctor's office and he had an emergency and you're sitting there for the 3rd hour, and how do you start to feel? Angry sometimes? Anxious? Impatient? Is that how we feel sometimes when our prayers aren't answered? Yeah, we're human, right? And so we still have some of those feelings. It's easy to be that way. So this morning we're going to talk about some Bible characters that had to wait. And we're going to put those on the board as we come up with them. I'm sure there'll be 2 or 3 that we often think of at the very beginning. Who had to wait in the Bible? Joseph. Who else? Hannah. Moses. Job. Who? Noah. David, yes. Who else? Abraham. Can you think of others? Esther. These are the ones we often think of. There are some others that we don't think of quite as often. Okay, what about Paul? Paul had to wait. Daniel. Okay, what about Ruth? Ruth had to wait. What about, I'm sorry? The Apostle John. I'm probably standing right in front of that for some of you. What about the man at the pool of Bethesda? Man at pool. I'm not going to spell out Bethesda. Okay, what about Jesus when he was here on earth? He waited 30 years before he started his ministry. Okay. Exiles in Babylon. It's a good thing you know what this says. Okay, what about Simeon and Anna? Nebuchadnezzar. We don't often think about him waiting, but he sure did. Whoops. Yes, 7 years. Okay. Oh, I have one last one. Joseph and Mary. Okay, they all had different types of waiting, didn't they? So let's run back through and talk about the different types of waiting they had. What kind of waiting did Joseph have? Yeah, lots.
He was waiting through unfairness.
Just a second, he's going to bring you the mic.
He was waiting through injustice and unfairness.
Okay, injustice. And while he was doing that, he also experienced loss of family, wondering whether his dreams would ever come true, and a lot of other things at the same time. What about Hannah? What did she experience as she waited?
Some
Daryl?
taunting from others.
I'm sorry?
Some taunting from others.
Taunting, that's right. Back then, it was considered that you were being blessed by God if you had children. If you didn't have children, you were cursed by God. Something was wrong, you weren't righteous. That's what people believed. So that would be really tough for her. What about Moses? List is long, just name a couple. Okay, he lost credibility. And he lost power. And a host of other things, didn't he? self-doubting, the promised land. And we don't always think about this with Moses, but he waited 40 years when he was herding sheep, and then he waited 40 years in the wilderness, 80 years. Have we waited that long for God on anything in our lives? Wow. Ray?
Constant murmuring and complaining.
Yes, constant murmuring and complaining.
That's some of the toughest stuff to deal with.
It is. Dirty dog. All right. What about Job? What did he experience? He lost everything. Okay. What about Noah?
20 years of ridicule.
Ridicule, yeah. What about his finances? I bet his finances went down the hole because he spent everything he had on this boat that everybody was talking about. Okay, David.
Only a boat owner could understand how.
What about David? What did he experience?
Highs and lows.
Okay. I think he experienced depression as well with those highs and lows. Loss of security.
His life and soul was wanting to get rid of him while he was waiting on becoming king.
Loss of life, almost. Oops, there we go. And what about strife in the family? Man, how would you like to eat with your father-in-law who wanted to kill you under the table? Not good. So family issues. What about Abraham? The promise. Yes, he was waiting on the promise. That's what we're all waiting on, isn't it? We're all waiting on God's promises. Esther, what did she experience while she was waiting? One thing we don't talk about very much is she experienced having to be in a harem with the king. How would you like your teenage daughter to do that? Tough. Paul. What about Paul? What did he experience? Thorn in the flesh. We don't know what that was. Some people think maybe he had back problems or eye problems, but no one knows for sure. Daniel. What about fear? Lion's den?
And
Loss of family?
He was looking for the promise.
Promise again. You know, we look at these Bible characters and we see the amazing things that they did, and we don't think about the human feelings that they had. They went through a lot of things as they were going through God's waiting room. What about Ruth? Lost her husband. Spouse. I'll just put family. How's that? Okay, John. Last one of the disciples standing. Here they thought Jesus was coming back any moment, and he's the last one, and he's marooned on an island and wondering, when is the promise going to be fulfilled?
That's when Peter talked to Jesus and said, "What about this one?" And people thought John was going to live till Jesus came again.
Yeah. So a lot of his thoughts about things that he thought were going to happen, didn't happen, did they? Not while he was coming along. The man at the pool, he waited 38 years. Jesus waited 30 years to start his ministry. The exiles in Babylon, we know that they had depression because they talk about weeping. They were there 70 years. What about Simeon and Anna? They waited a lifetime. Nebuchadnezzar, 7 years. Joseph and Mary, what did they experience? People probably made a lot of fun of them. Yeah, right, your child is going to be the Son of God. You know, I'm sure there was a lot of gossip. Plus, they had to be in Egypt for a while. So they lost family and culture and all different kinds of things. When you look at all this, you realize that people all through the ages have experienced all kinds of things in God's waiting room. Have you experienced any of these? Yeah, we all do. We may not experience every single one of them, but we're familiar, very familiar with this. Being on this earth is hard. Thankfully, we have God with us while we're in that waiting room.
Who do you think waited the best besides Jesus?
Good question. Who do you think waited the best? We know Moses lost his temper and couldn't go in the promised land, so we probably wouldn't put him at the head of the line.
I'd say Joseph.
Joseph. Yeah, I bet he had his bad days too, though. Job had a hard time. Daniel was amazing. Daryl.
What's interesting to me is that through all the waiting, we're in hindsight. They didn't know if there was ever going to be an answer.
That's right. When we're waiting, does it feel like forever and ever and ever? Sometimes. You know, it is a long, long time. You know, I really believe that God answers all of our prayers that he can right away because he wants us to know that he loves us and cares for us. And that there are going to be times when we have to wait and not know the answer. But the neat thing is, in the Bible, it says that he's right there in that waiting time with us. And so we're not alone, at least. So that's wonderful. Let's turn to Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 11.
Can I make one more comment?
Absolutely.
This waiting can be applied to faith. We have Hebrews 11, where God talks about these people of faith.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a little while. Ray, would you read this for us? Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 11. You have a good, strong voice.
Daryl's help, it's even stronger. To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to gain, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to throw away. A time to tear, and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time of war, and a time of peace. What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end.
Thank you, Ray. So God says there's time for this, that, the other, but it doesn't say that we're going to get what we want or that we've been promised now, does it? He says there'll be a time when the promise is fulfilled, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be at this moment. Waiting is hard. You know, when we lose a job and we wonder how we're going to provide for our family, it's hard. When we're waiting on medical tests to tell us whether we're going to survive or not, it's hard. When we lose a family member to an accident or a disease, it's hard. When we go through a divorce, it's hard. When we're walking through injustice, it's hard. When we experience deep depression, it's hard. When we lose a child or a spouse or someone else that's dear to us, it's hard. When we experience violence, it's hard. We've all had hard things. Some of you, probably all of you, are going through something in God's waiting room right now. I know last night, God woke me up twice in the night to pray for somebody that's near and dear to me. So I didn't sleep much last night. But this person is in God's waiting room. And we can't give up. Even though we may feel forgotten, we may feel doubts, insecurity, fear, anger, depending on the situation, betrayal. Sometimes we go through things that nobody else knows about, and then you feel alone in addition to all the things that are happening to you. And I can see just by your faces that everybody has experienced that. We're in God's waiting room right now. We're in the time in between, the time between the promise and the promise fulfilled. Satan likes to throw all kinds of things at us because he hates God and we're his children. And so he tries to do ugly things to us. Yes, Angela.
When we have experienced the hard challenges in life and the Lord has brought us through it, he's taught us how to wait. And we know as we go through the next journey in life, hard times, whatever comes our way, we know that we can trust the Lord through the process.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that we learn in God's waiting room, is learning to trust God. And is that easy? No, because we're human beings and we want to be in charge. We want things to go the way we want them to go, right? I mean, if you really are honest, that's what we all have to admit. You know, God has promised that one day he will redeem everything that Satan is trying to do to us. And even now, he will bring about as much good from whatever Satan is throwing at us, as much good as possible. Because he does redeem things. That's his business. He's our redeemer. And he brings good things out of everything hard that Satan throws at us. So many times it's easy to think, why is God doing this? Why is God letting this happen? He could change it. But there are rules to this war. And sometimes God says, wait. And we don't understand that because we're human beings. But God knows. His timing is always perfect. I read a story once about someone who was watching a parade. And they could see what was in front of them as the parade went by. But he had a friend that was sitting way up on top of a several-story building, and he could see what was coming. And that's like God. He can see what's coming, and so sometimes he knows that a quick answer isn't really the best for us for whatever reason, even though we don't understand it right now. That story helped me a lot because I could feel like God has my best interest at heart, and he has your best interest at heart. In the middle of suffering, it feels sometimes like God's forgotten you, but God sent his son so that he could come here and suffer all kinds of atrocities and every single emotion that we have ever had, so that he would be able to understand what we're going through and do what's best for us. He doesn't take the quick route. He always does what's best, and so we have to learn to trust him on that. While you're waiting, what kinds of things have you learned as you've gone through different hard times of waiting in God's waiting room? What are the benefits of waiting that we can't always see until later? What have you learned in a hard time in your life? Angela, he's bringing you the mic.
I've learned to be still and trust the process the Lord is doing. I've learned to let the Holy Spirit lead and guide instead of me doing my own thing, because I've messed up doing my own thing before and having my own thoughts. So I've learned to pray more and trust God in the process.
Okay, so you learn to trust. Yes, Gary.
Patience.
Patience. Are we humans good at that? Not at all. Not at all. I'm not anyway. Sometimes, I hate to admit it, but sometimes when I'm in God's waiting room, I'm not sitting in the chair, I'm screaming and kicking. Hate to admit that, but it's true. Okay, what about we learn who God really is in those times of waiting? I have a friend whose wife has a very debilitating disease, and it's been extremely hard for both of them. And after several years, he told me one day, he said, I've discovered that God is enough. God is enough. Wow. So we learn things about God. We also learn more about his word, because we get in there and we start hunting for things that will encourage us, for promises that God is with us and that he hasn't forgotten us. So we learn a lot more about his word as well. We learn to have more peace in the storm, because after you go through quite a few of these and God has somehow pulled you through, you say to yourself, okay, somehow God will pull me through this too. So we start to have a little more peace than we might have had at the beginning when we were in God's waiting room at another time. What about learning to trust God's timing? I knew someone in college that did some really strange things. Didn't find out till 20 years later what was going on in their life. And I thought God should fix it at the time, you know? But 20 years later, I found out what was really going on. We don't always know until later what's happening in our lives or somebody else's. And God has the perfect timing. Sometimes God also prepares us for a special ministry when we're going through a hard time, because he knows we'll be able to understand what someone else is going through. Have you experienced that? Something that you learned while you were waiting, you can help someone else with it? Yeah. There's a large group of people, and Rick talked about this, there's a large group of people who the Bible says are in God's waiting room. Let's turn to Hebrews 11. Okay, this is kind of long, but I feel like it stands ready for us to hear it, because this is something we don't read every day, and there's so much power in this chapter. Now, faith is the confidence of what we hope for, and assurance about what we don't see. This is what the ancients were recommended for. Sorry about that. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Abel brought a better offering than Cain. Thank you, Ray. By faith, he was commended as righteous, and God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he's dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is keeping with faith. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go to a place that he later would receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundation, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful, who had made him the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sands on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they're looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when tested, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise him from the dead. That's trust. And so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child. And they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God, rather to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to the reward. By faith, he left Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who was invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea on dry land. But when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, gained what was promised, and who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign enemies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released, so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised them, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. Inspiring. It's hard to be in the waiting room, but God helped these people to do it. And they encourage us by their example and their stories and what they did. And if God can help them, he can help us. We're going to make it through those hard times. Sometimes we can't even hang on to God, but he can hang on to us. Ellen White talks about there will be times in your life when you can't do anything at all. Just imagine yourself laying in God's arms and him holding you close. Right now, we're living in the in-between. But God is faithful. He will fulfill his promises. And I'm so, so grateful that when we're in the waiting room, we're not by ourselves, but God is with us. You know, God has been waiting too, not just us. He can hardly wait to come and get us and take us home. And I believe that Jesus, like the prodigal son's father, will run to meet us. He's not just bringing us to heaven, he's coming to get us. He can't wait. And so soon those promises will be fulfilled. And in the meantime, just let God hang on to you. Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, thank you so much that we're not alone. Thank you that no matter what we experience, you've experienced it too, and others have experienced it, and you've helped them through it. Thank you for your encouragement and your love, and that you're always with us. I pray these things in your name. Amen. Thank you for your participation.
Welcome to India. If you go to the southern state of Tamil Nadu, we find the city of Thanjavur. For the past 70 years, the E.D. Thomas Memorial Higher Secondary School has been teaching, training, and introducing students and teachers to Christ. Most of our church leaders in this region received training from this school. The 2,350 students come from a variety of family backgrounds and religions, all longing to get a good education.
Most of the children, they're coming from very, very poor background. But it is our duty to give the moral support to the children, building the character building. That is our motto. No one to live in this school without education, without God's spiritual power. That is our duty.
Surrounded by other schools, this school offers unique values that attract parents.
There are so many schools around here, but parents bring here. Nearby also parents bring here just because we are teaching discipline and about God.
Due to its age, this school faces serious problems with its facilities.
The girls' hostel, it is not secure because the building is very old. The government very strictly ordered do not have the asbestos sheet roof because it is affect the children. The government very strictly ordered to demolish the oldest building and especially in the asbestos sheet.
Miralini is one of the students staying in the girls' dorm. Coming to this school was a challenging experience because she needed to travel far from home. Even though she didn't come from an Adventist background, she made good friends in the dorm, learned about God, and excelled in class. She still admits there is room for improvement.
Yeah, we need some improvement because the hostel is not with concrete walls. It's as per our in summer days we're feeling so hard. We have to change this, and the toilet is not enough for us. We need some more rooms and some facilities there.
This quarter, a portion of your 13th Sabbath offering will help renovate the girls' dorm at E.D. Thomas Memorial Higher Secondary School, providing the students with a safer place to stay. Please pray for the students and teachers at this school. Pray that this school can effectively represent Christ despite their current situation.
Thank you for supporting 13th Sabbath offering for school.
I'll start playing the path on yourself.
I got you. Okay.
And then when that's done, if we